European Union has been a major development partner of Bangladesh. This year, we are celebrating 50 years of diplomatic relationship between EU and Bangladesh. How has been the relationship evolved? Where are we now? And where are we moving towards? EU Ambassador Mr. Charles Whiteley is here for details. Welcome to our show, Mr. Charles Whiteley. We'll definitely speak about the future relationship between EU and Bangladesh, but before that, would you please briefly say how the relationship has been there in the last 50 years and where do we stand?
Well, as you say, we're celebrating the 50th anniversary this year, so 5 decades of cooperation, and that cooperation has been in many sectors. At the beginning, principally related to development assistance, so we're a long-standing development partner of Bangladesh, and we've been supporting development of education, health, food security, governance and so on through these programs in collaboration with the government, also in collaboration with civil society and so on. So over those 5 decades, of course, the relationship between the EU and Bangladesh has evolved as Bangladesh has evolved and as the EU has evolved. And now the relationship is in a very interesting place. I think it's developing very rapidly. We see Bangladesh's position in the world developing very rapidly, and its relations with the EU are also changing. They're becoming a lot more focused on political issues, on regional issues, issues of mutual interest. So we had as you know, the launch of the political dialogue last year, but we're also deepening cooperation in practical terms on issues like ocean governance, on climate change, and on renewable energy. So all these issues that weren't on the table 5 decades ago are of course now important globally, and hence that's reflected in our bilateral relations too.
One of the very important things that in our relationship is that European Union is the largest destination of our export products. So we export $23 billion worth. There are issues that as Bangladesh graduates out of LDC by 2026, of course there are 3 years of grace period, I think, and you have a GSP plus, and we could really grow in this sector because you have been providing us trade preferential treatment. You once said that it will not be, GSP plus is not going to be a picnic. So what is it going to be?
I think first of all we should celebrate the success story of the RMG sector, and as you said, it's now reached almost 24 billion per year, the exports from Bangladesh to the European Union, 90% of which are ready-made garments. But that growth was 50% last year, and it makes you pause and think, a 50% growth in a time when we've just come out of a pandemic, where there's the Russian aggression in Ukraine, where the global economy is facing these strains, and yet Bangladesh's powerhouse economy on the garments front has achieved remarkable things. But also, as you say, the picture overall is changing. The picture with GSP will be changing in the future. There's a transition period to 2029, so there's certainty about the fact that duty-free and quota-free access to the EU market will be maintained until then. But then what the focus should very much be on is readying for GSP+. Right. That's a different trade scheme. It gives basically the same benefits, but with a few more conditions, and those conditions are that Bangladesh implement and ratify 32 international conventions, social, environmental, human rights, labor rights, and so on. Bangladesh, as you know, has ratified those conventions, and now the work is beginning and should begin in earnest to be ready to say in 2029, look, on all these issues, whether it be corruption, whether it be environmental concerns, whether it be labor standards, we have made tangible progress. And I'm confident that certainly the government and industry are very well aware of this. I think with full attention, the full attention that's happening from both the EU side and the Bangladesh side, we can have this smooth transition, because that's what we want, and it's also, of course, what business wants. Business needs certainty, and I often have business representatives here from the EU, from garments buyers and so on, saying, well, how can we be sure? I said, well, no one can be sure about what happens tomorrow, but we can be sure that if Bangladesh makes progress on this front, then the duty-free, quota-free access will remain. But I think it's also important to keep hammering the message that the export basket does need to be diversified. There need to be other products that Bangladesh is getting to the world, and I think that is happening. There is, a lot of innovation happening in Bangladesh, but it needs that extra push. It needs an extra push through deregulation in terms of attracting foreign direct investment and making the atmosphere overall more conducive to other export markets or export products.
So what are the products that are there and which have really demand in your...
I think there's a broad range of products. It can be logistics or a service sector, ICT. Bangladesh is already quite a growing and impressive provider of ICT services to the world. There are niche markets like bicycles, there's pharmaceuticals, which we all know Bangladesh is very adept now at producing, and I've seen some of the high-tech plants that are now operating in Bangladesh. There are plastics, there are jute, of course. We shouldn't overlook, just because it's an old industry, the potential of jute. And I've been to several meetings where there's experts saying, and the industry is saying, we can still do more with this fibre. But I think that there's every opportunity for Bangladesh to capitalise on different areas by attracting the foreign direct investment to also bring in technology, because of course in some of these areas technology is key, and to make that leap forward you need expertise from other countries, and I think Europe is a leader, for example, on green technology, and we're already seeing collaborations between European firms and Bangladeshi firms on green technology. That's another area I think with huge potential, also because of course Bangladesh is well aware of the impact of climate change and the need to meet the challenges of climate change.
The government has taken a policy, I think national plan of action on labor sector. So where do we stand now? What are the strengths and weaknesses that you can see at this moment?
Well, I think, as you know, there's a kind of parallel process in play. We have the National Action Plan on the labour sector, which has very many detailed recommendations that the government is working towards implementation of. And there's the ILO track as well. As you know, the governing body of the ILO meets regularly, and Bangladesh participates in that process. I think clearly there's a need for continued implementation and areas where more speedy implementation is needed, including on reform of the labour law. We look at issues like trade unions and so on, and workers' rights, where Bangladesh has ratified relevant ILO conventions, and where there's certainly a focus on the need to improve matters further. I think on the safety front, Rana Plaza really concentrated everybody's minds, the industry, governments, international institutions, and you've seen a lot of efforts to improve safety standards. But as you say, still in terms of legal reform in particular, and also in terms of the EPZs and so on, there's still a need to make these changes, and the time is ticking.
From the business side, there's a complaint that the buyers usually they try to pay less, so there's a demand that the price of the commodities is increased. So what is your understanding about that?
Well, I think in some cases that concern is very real, and I think buyers should be aware of the need to provide a fair price, and there should be a collective awareness of the need to provide a fair wage, because at the moment, as I understand it, there's a review going on of the minimum wage in terms of garment workers, and the key thing is that wage is a living wage, and everybody bears a responsibility in that respect, buyers and garments manufacturers and the authorities alike, so and consumers, because everybody says the European consumer is getting a lot more aware of environmental standards and becoming more demanding. But if you're a consumer demanding things, you should expect to pay more, even during a time of economic difficulty.
So there is also something called Green Deal in Europe. So there's businesses, climate change, environment. These are all linked. What is the status of that, and how Bangladesh is going to be impacted because of that?
Well, the Green Deal is a very big policy instrument that the EU has agreed on, and it has different elements, including the climate law, as you know. And now it's not just a political pledge, it's a legal pledge that we've made to reduce emissions and also reach climate neutrality by 2050. So that is now a legally binding goal of the EU and its member states, all 27 member states. That of course has implications also in terms of how we do business in the wider world. And there are different pieces of legislation coming down the line that will have an impact in Bangladesh. That includes due diligence, it includes environmental requirements. But what we're trying to do is make sure there are no surprises, so that business here, European business, consumers, and the Bangladeshi authorities are all aware that there are legal changes coming from the European side. And that's partly also why, as you know, we are establishing this year the European Chamber of Commerce, which will say, hey business, this bit of legislation may have an impact in Bangladesh, so you better get ready for it.
So Bangladesh is one of the leaders actually in terms of having green factories. So is Bangladesh on right track, or there are some other initiatives which need to be specially emphasized on?
I think in the garments industry, Bangladesh is very much on the right track, and the certification, LED compliance, and the number of platinum rated factories, it speaks for itself. It says that this industry is serious about meeting environmental conditions, and we very much welcome that, because it's also part of being competitive. Again, if consumers and business buyers are saying we need products that are compliant, it's a win for Bangladesh if you're already making those changes, which are costly. I mean, they have a cost and a cost impact. But it also means that Bangladesh is better placed for the transition to GSP+, because the environment is a huge part of that. Of course, in other areas, in other industries, there's a need for the same kind of approaches in the garments industry. If you think about the continued pollution by different industries in Bangladesh, and also, for example, brick kilns, I think there's a big effort now to look at the pollution that's coming from brick kilns, and we are going to be providing funding to help with the transition to a more eco-friendly production of bricks in this country.
Europe has been a very impressive destination for a lot of Bangladeshis. And in 2019, there was a agreement between Bangladesh and EU, SOP, I think, Standard Operating Procedure for repatriation of irregular Bangladeshis who are not eligible to have the citizenship there. They need to come back home. So what is the status now?
Well, I think we're very happy with how those standard operating procedures are now being implemented by the Bangladesh authorities. It's been a difficult process because, of course, it's not easy to register and prepare Bangladeshis who are illegally in Europe to come back to Bangladesh. Of course, many of them do not want to come back to Bangladesh. They wish to carry on working and earning a living in Europe. But now we see big progress. We had our first return of several dozen Bangladeshis from Europe with the support of our border agency, Frontex, in March. That was the first time that we used the Frontex agency in that way, and one of the first times we've used the Frontex agency in the world, and the Bangladesh authorities very much assisted in doing it that way. But I think we, of course, need to keep that work going forward, because there's a constant pressure in terms of illegal migration in Europe. We see many Bangladeshis still trying to get to Europe through illegal pathways, and facing enormous risks on the seas, in the Mediterranean, in the Atlantic, and this isn't good for anybody. It's dangerous and it's not managed. So what we're also trying to do is offer legal pathways, and that's very much, as you know, in the framework now of our 50th anniversary of relations. We're working on a talent partnership that will provide legal pathways for educated Bangladeshis to go and live and work in Europe, bring their skills to Europe, learn more in Europe, and then come back to Bangladesh, which is mutually beneficial. So I think that's the way forward.
Where are you now at this moment? I mean, in terms of talent partnership implementation?
So we are building, there's just been a meeting in Brussels. As you know, Honourable State Minister Shari Alam was in Brussels. He met the Commissioner Johansson, who's our Commissioner who visited, Commissioner for Home Affairs, who visited Bangladesh in November. At the moment, what we have to do is identify which sectors we need workers from Bangladesh, and that depends on our member states. So, of course, ultimately, the decision on which sector fits which country is for our member states. So that conversation is continuing, but we've identified where there are gaps in certain sectors, for example, in the health sector, where we may look at increasing the legal migration pathways to Europe. But we're building a picture at the moment, and I think it will become operational in due course. But to make it operational, it has to fit both the needs of the EU member state and the availability on the Bangladesh side. And of course, there are issues like language capabilities, and qualification capabilities to make sure it's a good fit. So it's a very complex thing. It won't happen overnight, but the political commitment is there and at the highest level, and that means that it will happen.
You undertook ambitious plan, which is the Global Gateway Initiative. So would you please explain what is that and how Bangladesh is, connected to that?
Well, Global Gateway is about delivering support for infrastructure globally. It's something we haven't always done as European Union, but the reason why it's possible now is that we've moved into a different phase of how we deliver our international cooperation. So we're now able to blend our development assistance with large loans from the European Investment Bank. So that means we can provide far bigger sums that are suitable for infrastructure. And here in Bangladesh, I'm very happy because Bangladesh is one of only a handful of countries that have what we're calling flagship Global Gateway projects. And the flagship project here, as you know, is renewable energy. Okay. So we hope to leverage, in terms of grants and loans, around 400 million euros to support the development of wind and solar energy in Bangladesh.
So that has already started?
That's already started. It hasn't been signed yet.
Okay.
All the planning is in place, and we expect the signing to happen very soon.
Okay.
And what that will do is support this transition. As you know, I think Bangladesh has the goal of 40% of energy generation from renewables by 2041. I think at the moment, Bangladesh is at 6%. So there's quite a way to go. And we want to be supportive on this because, as I said, the green transition is one of our 3 priorities here. But Global Gateway has huge potential in other areas. So the European Investment Bank has visited Bangladesh several times. Honourable State Minister Alam, when he was in Brussels, met with the Vice President of the EIB. And we're looking at perhaps having EIB involvement much more in the transport sector, for example, metro rail.
Okay.
That's all to be decided. But what I think is important to say is that we're not following the patterns of others. The Global Gateway is not like some other big players who provide funding for infrastructure. I think you probably know who I'm adverting to, where there's a certain tendency towards making sure that their own companies get the contracts, making sure their own workers implement the projects, perhaps engendering the risk of debt traps. That's happened in some countries. Global Gateway is specifically designed to avoid any of that. It's supposed to be about genuinely supporting the country to build its infrastructure and to build our relationship at the same time.
We have a real problem around the corner is the Rohingya crisis. So, the area is not stable from that perspective. We want stability, peace, inclusiveness. So, do you think that leaving this Rohingya crisis there, can we, establish peace, regional stability in this region?
Clearly, having 1.1 million refugees on your territory is a huge challenge, and it's going to bring issues of management and so on. I think my first point is Bangladesh has done this in an exemplary fashion. Bangladesh has kept, of course there have been some security issues in the camps, that's inevitable, but Bangladesh has done its utmost to address those, whilst also maintaining the rights and standards of the refugees, the food that's provided, the services that are provided with the support of the international community, including the European Union. But this, the longer this continues, of course, the more we need to be vigilant about potential issues relating to security. And we see the reports of trafficking in drugs and people. We know what's going on the Myanmar side of the border. And I think a key factor in restoring stability is addressing what's going on the Myanmar side, which is very worrying, and we've seen that the junta is violating human rights, and human rights and democratic freedoms are now very much being pushed back in Myanmar. So what's important is that we all continue to support Bangladesh on the Rohingya issue, that funding is maintained. We are maintaining EU funding. We've given up to 400 million euros for the crisis, but we need others to provide funding, because by providing funding and by providing livelihood opportunities for the Rohingya in preparation for going back, you remove some of the elements that might lead to further instability. So if you have a lot of young men who don't have jobs to do, who don't have anything to occupy their time, I think any layperson analysing that situation would say that increases the risk of radicalisation and so on in the camps. And I think what we're trying to do with others is to provide the funding that provides livelihood opportunities, provides food, and we need others to do that because there are some big players who are not providing funding, and hence we're now seeing the threat of ration cuts. So we need others to contribute, and I think Bangladesh is doing its best to encourage others to contribute.
We have been talking about partnership, cooperation, agreement. So what is actually that?
Well, at the moment we have an old agreement with Bangladesh that dates to 2001, and it's quite a simple agreement, focusing on development assistance and a little bit of trade and so on. Of course, there's a few other issues in the mix. But these PCAs, as we call them, Partnership and Cooperation Agreements, they are agreements that we conclude with our closest partners, where the relationship is really moving to the next level. So, because it takes a lot of negotiation, there are many sectoral issues involved, from nuclear cooperation to climate change to energy, and a more political relationship. So, more of a regional touch on regional issues, which we've already discussed in the first political dialogue last year. But it puts it in a more political framework. So, for example, under our old agreement that's still in force now, the lead agency on the Bangladesh side is the ERD, which reflects the fact that it's about development assistance and so on. The lead agency under the PCA will be a high-level foreign ministry and high-level EU official. So it puts in a much more modern framework our relations. And I hope we can get that negotiated quite quickly. It needs ratification, of course, once it's an approval of our 27 member states and the European Parliament. But there is such a momentum behind our relations now that I think we can, with a fair wind, get this agreement done in good order.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.